They called it a holy journey, a march for God, a war to cleanse the sins of Christendom. But far from the Holy Land, in a forgotten corner of the Mediterranean, the crusade was not guided by faith. It was sold, in secret, to pirates. This is the story of a port hidden from glory, a place erased from maps, but not from history, a port where the crusade turned, not toward God, but toward gold. It began as so many crusades did, with a promise. The year was 1198. Europe was restless, wounded by the loss of Jerusalem. The holy city had fallen to Saladin. The Third Crusade, led by kings and legends, had failed to reclaim it. And so, from the throne of the Vatican, Pope Innocent III issued a call. A Fourth Crusade, a final redemption. Knights across Europe answered. Lords mortgaged their lands. Priests roused peasants with sermons of salvation. The banners were raised again. But this time, the plan was different. Instead of marching over land, the Crusaders would sail to Egypt, the supposed heart of Muslim power, and strike there. It was a bold strategy, a new tactic, and for that they needed ships. Lots of them. They turned to Venice. The deal was made. Ships would be built. Soldiers would be ferried. The cost? 85,000 silver marks. But there was a problem. When the time came, the Crusaders didn't have the money. This wasn't a few missing coins. It was a catastrophic shortfall. They were in debt to Venice. What happens when an army of God can't pay its bills? Finds a new master. Enter the Doge of Venice, Enrico Dandolo. Nearly blind, well into his 90s, but sharper than any sword. He had no interest in salvation, but he saw opportunity. The Crusaders would repay their debt, not with coin, but with blood. Venice had enemies, rivals on the Adriatic. One of them was Zara, a rebellious Christian city that had defied Venetian control. And so, in 1202, under the cross of Christ, the Crusaders laid siege, not to Muslims, but to fellow Christians. Zara fell. Christians slaughtered Christians, and the Pope excommunicated the entire crusade. But this was only the beginning. Behind the stage of faith and war, darker negotiations were underway. Not in churches, not in royal halls, but in a place whispered about by sailors and spies. A port, forgotten by maps, ruled not by kings, but by pirates. Modon. Located on the southern tip of the Peloponnese in Greece, Modon was more than a pit stop for ships. It was a shadow market, a neutral ground where merchants, mercenaries, pirates, and spies conducted business with no questions asked. It was here that the Fourth Crusade came, not to pray, but to bargain. After Zara, the crusade was adrift, literally and politically. The Pope's blessing was broken. The money was gone. The army was fracturing. And then, an offer arrived. A young Byzantine prince, Alexios Angelos, had been deposed in Constantinople. He needed an army. In return, he promised silver, supplies, and ships. More than that, he offered to reunite the Eastern Church with Rome. But this deal couldn't be made in public. It was heresy to divert a crusade from the Holy Land. And so, the talks happened here in Modon, away from the gaze of Rome, away from the judgment of God. Among pirates, documents do not record every word. But what we know is chilling. Venetian merchants, disgraced nobles, excommunicated bishops, and agents of the Byzantine prince met under torchlight in the dark taverns of Modon. Deals were struck in wine-stained whispers. Sacks of silver changed hands. Old crusaders traded relics, even armor, for coin. Some offered their swords to the highest bidder. Others sold information, military plans, ship routes, even troop locations. Modon became the unofficial headquarters of a crusade that no longer served heaven. It served whoever could pay. And so, with pirate ships trailing them for loot and merchants counting profits, the Crusaders turned toward Constantinople. In 1203, they laid siege to the city, not to liberate it, but to install a puppet. Alexios was crowned. The Byzantines, outraged, resisted. The deal collapsed. The Crusaders, furious at the broken promise, attacked again. In April 1204, they breached the walls of Constantinople. What followed was not conquest. It was annihilation. Monasteries were looted. Nuns were raped. Priceless relics stolen. The greatest Christian city in the world burned under the hands of men who claimed to fight for Christ. They melted ancient statues for coins. They stripped icons of gold. They desecrated altars. A prostitute was seated on the throne of the Patriarch of Constantinople while crusaders cheered. The betrayal was complete, and Modon was never mentioned again. But its role was carved into the bones of history. It was the port where the holy was sold for silver, where knights became mercenaries, where the crusade lost its soul. Today, Modon is a quiet Greek town known as Methone. Its castle ruins overlook calm waters. Tourists walk the ancient stones, unaware of what once happened there. But beneath the earth, the whispers remain. They whisper of the night deals, of masked pirates who traded swords for souls, of a crusade that never reached Jerusalem because it was sold at sea. And if you listen closely, you'll hear the questions we're still afraid to ask. What is a holy war when it serves a merchant's ledger? What is salvation when bought by pirates? And if Christendom could be sold once, could it be sold again? This was not the crusade we were taught. This was the one they tried to erase. This was the crusade of the shadows. And the secret port where it was sold was Modon. You've been watching CIHUYS, and now you know the truth they never wanted you to hear.